The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Hold on, guys, I'll be right there. Alright guys, what's up everybody? I was talking to a couple of people in the chat about audio problems and I forgot all about the time. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I'm your host Walter, coming to you from the Netherlands. It's the 16th of January 2016. There's a website, ucy.tv. If you go there, you can see a chat link. There's a couple of people there already. Cap, Dan, JJ, Joe, Jules, Matty, and Vince. Welcome everybody. Hold on, I'll be right back. Coffee! There we go. Alright, so bird types. If you want to join on the radio, you can do so. What is it about the birds, Cap? What's that? A 200 bird coffee. Anyway, if you want to join, you can do so by contacting me via Skype. It's SOLVINUR, Solvinur, on Skype. And I'll get you on air. Alright, Capt. Oh yeah, I heard about that. Is that, let me open that cap. Protesters call for end to Mueller occupation. Oh, what the hell? Not now, go away. Rally draws about 100 people to downtown Bend. What is this about? Birds. Birds? Wearing a homemade bird costume with fabric feathers, Judy Meredith helped lead a march Friday in downtown Bend to protest the ongoing armed occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge headquarters. Alright, so that is what I was thinking it would be. Birds are coming soon, and the refuge near Burns needs to welcome them. Hi, birds! How you doing? You got to be kidding me, right? Yeah. As if these birds even have an idea of what humans are. Leave the birds alone. Leave people alone also. Yeah. That site is giving a lot of pop-ups. Cap. No problem though. I got rid of them. Yeah, I'm going on information I get from JJ about this. And since he's reluctant, I will be too. Yeah. You know, we don't have as Europeans, we don't have a good understanding of some of the things that are going on in the United States. I remember that a lot of people here in the Netherlands think that Americans are crazy. You guys are crazy. Especially the religious ones. Yeah. Because they saw Jesus camp here, you know, and that's the idea that the Dutch people, but also Germans, because they saw it also. That's the idea that we have of Americans. You guys are crazy. Didn't used to be like that. I remember even my aunt speaking to me about the United States as the land of the free and anything is possible. Yeah. So today I only have 2 things open. Of course we can open other things as well, but it's either the Emerald Tablet. This is supposed to be by Thoth. Yeah. But it's a bit late, right? There are apparently, I haven't looked very carefully, but there don't seem to be records of the time when he was supposed to be around like 30,000 BC, 36,000 BC. Or Plutarch. That's one I would think to be interesting. Okay, that's I don't know what that sound is here, but never heard it. Sounds like a helicopter. So Plutarch is a Greek historian, biographer, and other things. So what do you guys want to hear? Thoth's Emerald Tablet, or Plutarch, or you can join me, Solvinur, Skype. What's it gonna be, guys? What do you want to hear? Since there's only so few people that listen anyway. Also on YouTube, there aren't that much. There's a couple of, maybe 2 or so that have like more than 1,000 views, but that's because of the guest that I had. So, since this is a small audience, I guess we might as well dive into the more difficult stuff. Like Plutarch. Yeah. Alright, so let's go with Plutarch. There let's see. There's two things I have here, I think, about Plutarch. Let me check. No, it's not here. I thought I had some writings open by him, but apparently I must have clicked away that tab or something. So Plutarch is born in 46, in the year 46, and apparently died in the year 120, so he was like 80 or so. According to the history blueprint by Richard Grove, what came before him is Plato, and after him Fabius. Is that Fabius from the Fabian Society? Probably, right? This doesn't work very well. Fabius Maximus, yeah. So he came later. Now we need to go back to Plutarch. Yep. And on the left side, no, on the right side, there's other things, but it has to do more with Plato. Among which is the Noble Lie. René Descartes is a philosopher that has been linked here with Plato. I'm not sure whether Descartes is a Platonist. Descartes was more about doubt. He just didn't seem to know, I think, if I remember the name correct. Yeah, I think so. You guys know I get names confused sometimes, right? But this is the guy that was very unsure about everything that his senses told him, and he didn't trust any of it. And so whatever was outside, or what I would call existence, that which stands outside, he couldn't, come to the conclusion that that is what must be. And the only starting point that he could find was his own consciousness. So this is primacy of consciousness. As opposed to primacy of existence. Alright, Plutarch. This should be an interesting figure. I've heard Bill Cooper speak about him a lot. Now, why is this not working? Go away. There we go. Plutarch. Is later named, upon becoming a Roman citizen, Lucius Mestrius Plutarchus. And he was a Greek historian, biographer, and essayist, known primarily for his parallel lives and Moralia. So that's what I thought I had open, parallel lives, but we'll figure out where that went later. He's classified as a Middle Platonist. Plutarch's surviving works are believed to have been originally written in Koine Greek. It's Koine, Greek. I never heard of that. So apparently he's talking about life of Alexander, and see, I had one of those open to start reading. Oh yeah, now I remember. This is where it is. The first one we would be getting into would be H. That's more of an English, trying to speak it out in English. Ajay-Silaus, something like that. One of the people that he's writing about. Aegis comes to mind. So this parallel lives is about Spartan lives and sayings, the life of Alexander and Caesar, and more. There have been Latin translations, French, German. Early life of Plutarch was born to a prominent family in a small town of Chaironea, something like that. Hold on, I gotta fix the chat here, otherwise I can't see. Here we go. Just give him nicknames, Cap. Yeah. So he was born in Chaironea, something like that, which lies approximately 18 kilometers, that's about 12 miles or so, east of Delphi, in the Greek region known as Boeotia, something like that. His family was wealthy. The name of Plutarch's father has not been preserved, but it was probably Nicarchus, from the common habit of Greek families to repeat the name in alternate generations. The name of Plutarch's grandfather was Lamprias, and he attested in Moralia and in his Life of Antony. His brothers, so he had two brothers apparently, Timon and Lamprias, are frequently mentioned in his essay and dialogues, wherein Timon in particular is spoken of in the most affectionate terms. Hey Joe. Rualdus, in his 1624 work Life of Plutarchus, recovered the name of Plutarch's wife, Timoxena, from internal evidence afforded by his writings. A letter is still extant, addressed. A letter is still extant. Do they mean with that there still exists a letter? Addressed by Plutarch to his wife, bidding her not to give way to excessive grief at the death of their 2-year-old daughter, who was named Timoxena after her mother. Interestingly, he hinted at a belief in reincarnation in that letter of consolation, and there needs to be a source for that claim, according to this wiki article. Coffee. You guys have something to drink also, I hope. The exact number of his sons is not certain, although two of them, Autobulus and Second Plutarch, are often mentioned. Plutarch's treatise, De Anime Procreation, something like that, procreation, I don't know, in Timeo is dedicated to them, his children, and the marriage of his son Autobulus is the occasion of one of the dinner parties recorded in the Table Talk. quote-unquote table talk. Another person, Soclarus, is spoken of in terms which seem to imply that he was Plutarch's son, but this is nowhere definitely stated. His treatise on marriage questions addressed to Eurydice and Polianus, or something like that, seems to speak of her as having been recently an inmate of his house, but without enabling us to form an opinion whether she was his daughter or not. Alright. Plutarch studied mathematics and philosophy at the Academy of Athens under Ammonius from 66 to 67. Alright, that's only 1 year. That's not a lot. That's odd. Because he's also sometimes called a philosopher, if I'm not mistaken. At some point, Plutarch took up Roman citizenship, as evidenced by his new name. His sponsor for citizenship was Lucius Mestrius Florus, a Roman of consular status whom Plutarch also used as a historical source for his life of Otho. He lived most of his life in Chaeronea and was initiated into the mysteries of the Greek god Apollo. Interesting. However, his duties as the senior of the two priests of Apollo at the Oracle of Delphi, where he was responsible for interpreting the auguries of the Pythia, apparently occupied little of his time. Pythia, that's interesting. Pythia comes back in 2004 Star Wars series, Book of Pythia. So he was a priest. It's good to know that. A priest at the Oracle of Delphi even. For many years Plutarch served as one of the two priests at the temple of Apollo at Delphi, the site of the famous Delphic Oracle, 20 miles from his home. By his writings and lectures, Plutarch became a celebrity in Roman Empire. Yet he continued to reside where he was born and actively participated in local affairs, even serving as mayor. As mayor? I thought in those days they had city-states. I guess I'm mistaken. At his country estate, guests from all over the empire congregated for serious conversation, presided over by Plutarch in his marble chair. Many of these dialogues were recorded and published, and the 78 essays and other works which have survived are now known collectively as the Moralia. Yeah, well, I guess the city-states must have been earlier. You know, this is Roman times, right? I'm not sure about the form of government that's in place at that moment. work as magistrate and ambassador. Well, I think we've done enough parallel lives, a little bit. His best known work it is a series of biographies of famous Greeks and Romans arranged in pairs to illustrate their common moral virtues and vices. The surviving lives contain 23 pairs, each with one Greek life and one Roman life, as well as 4 unpaired single lives. As explained in the opening paragraph of his Life of Alexander, Plutarch was not concerned with history so much as the influence of character, good or bad, on the lives and destinies of men. Whereas sometimes he barely touched on epoch-making events, he devoted much space to charming anecdote and incidental triviality, reasoning that this often said far more for his subjects than even their most famous accomplishments. He sought to provide rounded portraits, likening his craft to that of a painter. Indeed, he went to tremendous length, often leading to tenuous comparisons, to draw parallels between physical appearance and moral character. In many ways, he must be counted amongst the earliest moral philosophers. Right, see, that's what I was thinking, that he was known as a philosopher. And he got 1 year of study? It seems a bit odd. Alright, so Spartan lives and sayings, Spartan lives and sayings, that should be. And Life of Alexander, those are all things we might come back to later, but I doubt it. So this is the actual writing by Plutarch, and I don't know if if this is even interesting enough. I never read any stuff by him, but I've heard many people besides Bill Cooper quote Plutarch, so I thought it might be interesting. Agesilaus, something like that. Archidamus, no, so not Archimedes, but more like Archidamus, the son of Zeuxidamus, after an illustrious reign over the Macedonians, left behind him a son, Agis. That's Agis, by Lampido, a woman of honorable family, and a much younger son, Agesilaus, by Eupolia, the daughter of Melesipidas. Yeah, remember when I read to you guys from the Mahabharata, where they were also very obsessed, I would say, with who's the son of who? Yeah. You see that back in the Bible also, right? In the Old Testament. The kingdom belonged to Agis by law, and it was thought that Agesilaus would pass his life in a private station. He was therefore given the so-called agoge, a course of public training in Sparta, which, although austere in its mode of life and full of hardships, educated the youth to obedience. For this reason it was, we are told, that Simonides gave Sparta the epithet of man subduing, since more than in any other state her customs made her citizens obedient to the laws and tractable, like horses that are broken in while. With horses that are broken, that means domesticated, in while yet they are colts. Alright, so I don't know what that is. From this compulsory training, the law exempts the heir apparent to the throne. But Silas was singular in this also, that he had been educated to obey before he came to command. For this reason, he was much more in harmony with his subjects than any of the kings. To the commanding and kingly traits which were his by nature, there had been added his public training, those of popularity and kindliness. While he was among the so-called bands of boys who were reared together, he had as his lover Lysander. That's odd, right? Lysander. We know that name from Lysander Spooner, who was smitten particularly with his native decorum. For although he was contentious and high-spirited beyond his fellows, wishing to be first in all things, and having a vehemence and fury which none could contend with or overwhelm, on the other hand, he had such a readiness to obey and such gentleness that he did whatever was enjoined upon him, not at all from a sense of fear, but always from a sense of honor, and was more distressed by censure than he was oppressed by hardships. As for his deformity, the beauty of his person in its youthful prime covered this from sight, while the ease and gaiety, I don't know what that is, Gaiety, while the ease and gaiety with which he bore such a misfortune, being first to jest and joke about himself, went far towards rectifying it. Indeed, his lameness brought his ambition into clearer light, since it led him to decline no hardship and no enterprise whatever. We have no likeness of him, for he himself would not consent to one, and even when he lay dying forbade the making of either statue or picture of his person. But he is said to have been a little man of unimposing presence, and yet his gaiety and good spirits in every crisis, and his raillery, which was never offensive or harsh either in words or look, made him more lovable down to his old age than the young and beautiful. But according to Theophrastus, Archidamus was fined by the Ephors for marrying a little woman, for she will bear us, they said, not kings, but kinglets. Hold on, guys. 3. It was during the reign of Ages that Alcibiades came from Sicily as an exile to Sparta, and he had not been long in the city when he incurred that the charge of illicit intercourse with Timea, the wife of the king. The child, too, that was born of her, Ages refused to recognize as his own, declaring that Alcibiades was its father. Juris says that Timea was not very much disturbed at this, but in whispers to her helot maids at home actually called the child Alcibiades, not Leotiades, something like that. Moreover, that Alcibiades himself also declared that he had not approached Timea out of wanton passion, but because he was ambitious to have the Spartans reigned over by his descendants. On this account, Alcibiades withdrew from Sparta, being in fear of Agis, and the boy was always an object of suspicion to Agis, and he was not honored by him as legitimate. But when the king lay sick, the supplications and tears of Leotiades prevailed upon him to declare him his son in the presence of many witnesses. Notwithstanding this, after the death of Agis, Lysander, who by this time had subdued the Athenians at sea, and was a man of the greatest influence in Sparta, tried to advance Agesilaus to the throne, on the plea that Leotiades was a bastard and had no claim upon it. Many of the other citizens also, owing to the excellence of Agesilaus and the fact that he had been reared with them under the common restraints of the public training, warmly espoused the plan of Lysander and cooperated with him. But there was a diviner in Sparta named Diophates, who was well supplied with ancient prophecies, and was thought to be eminently wise in religious matters. This man declared it contrary to the will of heaven that a lame man should be the king of Sparta, and cited at the trial of the case the following oracle. Bethink thee now, O Sparta, though thou art very glorious, lest from thee, sound of foot, there spring a maimed royalty, for long will unexpected toils oppress thee, and onward rolling billows of man-destroying war. To this Lysander answered that, in case the Spartans stood in great fear of the oracle, they must be on their guard against Leotiades. For it mattered not to the god the one who halted in his gate should be king, but if one who was not lawfully begotten, nor even a descendant of Heracles, should be king. This was what the god meant by the maimed royalty. And Agesilaus declared that Poseidon also had borne witness to the bastardy of Leotiades, for he had cast Agis forth from his bedchamber by an earthquake, and after this more than 10 months elapsed before Leotiades was born. Hold on, guys. Rolling a ciggy here. In this way, and for these reasons, Agesilaus was appointed king, and straightway enjoyed possession of the estate of Agis as well as his throne, after expelling Leotiades as a bastard. But seeing that his kinsmen on his mother's side, though worthy folk, were excessively poor, he distributed among them half of his estates, thereby making his inheritance yield him goodwill and reputation instead of envy and hatred. As for Xenophon's statement that by obeying his country in everything he won very great power, so that he did what he pleased, the case is as follows. At that time the ephors and the senators had the greatest power in the state, of whom the former hold office for a year only, while the senators enjoy their dignity for life. Their offices having been instituted to restrain the power of the kings, as I have said in my life of Lycurgus. Therefore, from the outset and from generation to generation, the kings were traditionally at feud and variance with them. Yeah, this reminds me of Etienne de la Boutie. Also one that William Roberts pointed out. There's a stomach-turning video about what is supposed to be his writings or sayings. Etienne de la Boutie in around 1500 somewhere, 1550. He also touches upon the relationship between the king and those just beneath him. But Agesilaus took the opposite course. Instead of colliding and fighting with them, he courted their favor, winning their support before setting out on any undertaking, and whenever he was invited to meet them, hastening to them on the run. If ever the ephors, I don't know what that is, E-P-H-O-R-S, if ever the ephors visited him when he was seated in his royal chair and administering justice, he rose in their honor, and as men were from time to time made members of the Senate, he would send each one a cloak and an ox as a mark of honor. Consequently, while he was thought to be honoring and exalting the dignity of their office, he was unawares increasing his own influence. That sentence doesn't make quite sense to me. And adding to the power of the king a greatness which was conceded out of goodwill towards him. This is 5. In his dealings with the rest of the citizens, he was less blameworthy as an enemy than as a friend, for he would not injure his enemies without just cause, but would not injure his enemies without just cause? If somebody is an enemy, right, it would follow from the definition of the word enemy that you would be willing to injure, right? But joined his friends even in their unjust practices. Join evil or something. That's what it sounds like to me anyway. And whereas he was ashamed not to honor his enemies when they did well, he could not bring himself to censure his friends when they did amiss, but actually prided himself on aiding them and sharing in their misdeeds. For the thought not to aid disgraceful that was given to a friend. For the thought no aid disgraceful that was given to a friend. Well, Still wondering. Good morning, Jules, Hopper, Dale, Atox. How you doing, everybody? But if, on the other hand, his adversary stumbled and fell, he was first to sympathize with them and gave them zealous aid if they desired it, and so won the hearts and the allegiance of all. The efforts, all right, that's the third time, that's enough. It's probably something like, can I copy this? Yes. It's probably something like minister or so. Paste. Search. F4. Were leaders of ancient Sparta and shared power with 2 Spartan kings. Alright, F4s. A council of 5. Huh. Council of 5. Okay. Die kan weg. The Ephors, accordingly, seeing this and fearing his powers, laid a fine upon him, alleging as a reason that he made the citizens his own, who should be the common property of the state. Natural philosophers are of the opinion that, if strife and discord should be banished from the universe, Jesus Christ, don't you think you're going a bit too far there, the universe? Seriously, we are less than a speck of dust in the universe. Natural philosophers are of the opinion that if strife and discord should be banished from the universe, the heavenly bodies would stand still, and all generation and motion would cease in consequence of the general harmony. Well, that's odd. Saying that the heavenly bodies would stand still is saying that time stopped. I'm still struggling with this idea of time. There are other philosophers out there, and I'm guessing this would be most of them, that would claim that the future does exist and that the past does exist. I got a lot of trouble with that. I really have a hard time seeing how the future actually exists. I think it's a concept that we humans came up with. Right? I'm just not sure about it really existing. The same goes for the past, even though that actually happened. Right? So, but the whole idea of time and space need to fit in this philosophy that I'm trying to make, metaphysically speaking. Right? So, when it says here, heavenly bodies would stand still, that's like a time stop, right? And the only thing that I could think of that they would be referring to is an absolute world. Because in an absolute world, time does not exist. Time only exists, according to the ancient writings that I've come across anyway, time only exists in a material world. Right? So what they're saying here is they're seeing matter as darkness, right? A material world made up of matter. They look at that up as darkness, where time and space exist. And the heaven, right? They're talking about heavenly bodies would stand still here. The heaven, right, so which would normally speaking be that what you see when you look up in the sky at night, right, there is this other idea which comes back in Christianity and other religions as this place where you go if you've behaved well, or you go to hell if you've behaved badly, right? So this heaven, it doesn't have time and space. It doesn't have matter also. Natural philosophers claim the heavenly bodies would stand still and all generations and motion would cease, right? So there can be no motion. There's no time and space, right? That's also a reason, well, maybe it's not a reason why, but that's the same as the idea that the ancient Indians have about your self, and then they mean self with a capital S. They're talking about yourself with a capital S as being motionless, right? Because there can be no motion where there is no space. And since they think that yourself or your soul is not made up of matter, but of a totally different kind of energy. And this state of energy cannot exist in a motion, in a state that has motion. They call that illusionary, like some of the ancient Greek philosophers also tried, like Zeno. He also was of the idea that motion doesn't exist. I guess I'm a bit leaning towards that when it comes to building a worldview. It's crazy, I know. Motion doesn't exist. That sounds very strange, right? I don't know what to do with it. Continuing, and so the Spartan lawgiver seems to have introduced the spirit of ambition and contention into his civil polity as an incentive to virtue, desiring that good citizens should always be somewhat at variance and in conflict with one another, and deeming that complacence which weakly yields without debate, which knows no effort and no struggle, to be wrongly called concord. And some think that Homer also was clearly of this mind, for he would not have represented Agamemnon as pleased with Odysseus and Achilles were carried away into abuse of one another with frightful words, if he had not thought the general interests likely to profit by the mutual rivalry and quarreling of the chieftains. This principle, however, must not be accepted without some reservations, for excessive rivalries are injuries to states, and productive of great perils. Moving on to 6. Agesilaus had but recently come to the throne, when tidings were brought from Asia that the Persian king was preparing a great armament with which to drive the Lacedaemonians from the sea. Now Lysander was eager to be sent again into Asia, and to aid his friends there. These he had left governors and masters of the cities, but owing to their unjust and violent conduct of affairs, they were being driven out by the citizens, and even put to death. Wow. He therefore persuaded Agesilaus to undertake the expedition and make war in behalf of Hellas, proceeding to the farthest point across the sea, and thus anticipating the preparations of the barbarian. At the same time, he wrote to his friends in Asia, urging them to send messengers to Sparta and demand Agesilaus as their commander. Accordingly, Agesilaus went before the assembly of the people and agreed to undertake the war if they would grant him 30 Spartans as captains and counselors, a select corps of 2,000 enfranchised helots, and a force of allies amounting to 6,000. They readily voted everything, owing to the cooperation of Lysander, and sent Agesilaus forth at once with the 30 Spartans. Of these, Lysander was first and foremost, not only because of his reputation and influence, but also because of the friendship with Agesilaus, in whose eyes his procuring him this command was a greater boon than his raising him to the throne. While his forces were assembling at Gerastes, Agesilaus himself went to Aulis with his friends and spent the night. As he slept, he thought a voice came to him, saying, "King of the Lacedaemonians, thou art surely aware that no one has ever been appointed general of all Hellas together except Agamemnon in former times, and now thyself after him." Some voice came to him? That's odd. "And since thou commandest the same hosts that he did, and wagest war on the same foes, and sets out for the war from the same place, it is meet that thou should sacrifice also to the goddess the sacrifice which he made there before he set sail." Almost at once Agesilaus remembered the sacrifice of his own daughter, which Agamemnon had there made, in obedience to the soothsayers. Can you believe that? In obedience to the soothsayers? That's interesting, right? Let's see. This is probably nothing especially Greek or so, but let's see what we get. Paste. Soothsayer. Definition. Yeah. Simple definition. Someone who makes predictions about what is going to happen in the future. A soothsayer. So they actually believed in these people in those days. Huh. Interesting. He was not disturbed, however, but after rising up and imparting his vision to his friends, declared that he would honor the goddess with a sacrifice in which she could fitly take pleasure, being a goddess, and would not imitate the cruel insensibility of his predecessor. What are we supposed to make of this? Do we really Are we really expected to believe that these people sacrifice their own daughters to some goddess? So he caused a hind to be wreathed with chaplets and ordered his own seer to perform the sacrifice instead of the one customarily appointed to this office by the what? By the Boeotians? Man, this is sounding like science fiction. Accordingly, when the Boeotian magistrates heard of this, they were moved to anger and sent their officers, forbidding Agesilaus to sacrifice, contrary to the laws and customs of the Boeotians. These officers not only delivered their message, but also snatched the thigh pieces of the victim from the altar. Agesilaus therefore sailed away in great distress of mind. He was not only highly incensed at the Thebans, but also full of ill boding on account of the omen. He was convinced that his undertaking would be incomplete and that his expedition would have no fitting issue. 7. As soon as he came to Ephesus, the great dignity and influence which Lysander enjoyed were burdensome and grievous to him. The doors of Lysander were always beset with a throng, and all followed in his train and paid him court, as though Agesilaus had the command in name and outward appearance to comply with the law, while in fact Lysander was master of all, had all powers, and did everything. In fact, none of the generals sent out to Asia ever had more power or inspired more fear than he. None other conferred greater favors on his friends, or inflicted such great injuries upon his enemies. All this was still fresh in his men's minds, and besides, when they saw the simple, plain, and familiar manners of Agesilaus, while Lysander retained the same vehemence and harshness, at the same brevity of speech as before, they yielded to the latter's influence altogether, and attached themselves to him alone. As a consequence of this, in the first place, the rest of the Spartans were displeased to find themselves assistants of Lysander rather than counselors of the king, and, in the second place, Agesilaus himself, though he was not an envious man, nor displeased that others should be honored, but exceedingly ambitious and high-spirited, began to fear that any brilliant success which he might achieve in his undertakings would be attributed to Lysander, owing to popular opinion. He went to work therefore in this way. To begin with, he resisted the counsels of Lysander, and whatever enterprises were most earnestly favored by him. These he ignored and neglected, and did other things in their stead. Again, of those who came to solicit favors from him, he sent away empty-handed all those who put their chief confidence in Lysander. And in judicial cases likewise, all those against whom Lysander inveighed were sure to come off victorious, while, on the contrary, those whom he was manifestly eager to help had hard work even to escape being fined. These things happened, not casually, but as a set of purpose, and uniformly. Hold on, guys. At last Lysander perceived the reason, and did not hide it from his friends, but told them it was on his account that they were slighted, and advised them to go and pay their court to the king, and to those more influential with him than himself. 8. Accordingly, since his words and acts seemed contrived to bring odium upon the king, Agesilaus, wishing to despite him still more, appointed him his carver of meats, and once said, we are told, in the hearing of many, "Now then, let these suppliants go off to my carver of meats and pay their court to him." That's odd. Lysander then, deeply pained, said to him, "I see, Agesilaus, that thou knowest very well how to humble thy friends." "Yes, indeed," said the king. "Those who wish to be more powerful than I am." Then Lysander said, "Well, perhaps these words of thine are fairer than my deeds. Give me, however, some post and place where I shall be of service to thee without vexing thee." Upon this he was sent to Hellespont, and brought over to Agesilaus from the country of Pharnabazus, Spitridates, a Persian, with much money and 200 horsemen. He did not, however, lay aside his wrath, but continued his resentment, and from this time on planned how he might wrest the kingdom from the two royal families, and making all Spartans once more eligible to it. And it was thought that he would have brought about a great disturbance in consequence of this quarrel, had not death overtaken him on his expedition into Boeotia. Thus ambitious natures in a commonwealth, if they do not observe due bounds, work greater harm than good. For even though Lysander was troublesome, as he was, in gratifying his ambition unseasonably, still Agesilaus must surely have known another and more blameless way of correcting a man of high repute and ambition when he erred. As it was, it seems to have been due to the same passion that one would not recognize the authority of his superior, nor the other endure the being ignored by his friend and comrade. Strange, these words that are being used here, like commonwealth, comrade. It's odd. 9. At first, Tissaphernes was afraid of Agesilaus, and made a treaty in which he promised him to make the Greek cities free and independent of the king. Afterwards, however, when he was convinced that he had a sufficient force, he declared war, and Agesilaus gladly accepted it. For he had great expectations from his expedition, and he thought it would be a disgraceful thing if, whereas Xenophon and his 10,000 had penetrated to the sea and vanquished the king just as often as they themselves desired, he, in command of the Lacedaemonians, can't get that out straight, who had the supremacy on sea and land, should perform no deed worthy of remembrance in the eyes of the Hellenes. At once, then, that word is what? Requiting the perjury of Tissaphernes with a righteous deception, he gave out word that he was going to lead his troops against Caria. But when the barbarian had assembled his forces there, he set out and made an incursion into Phrygia. He captured many cities and made himself master of boundless treasure, thus shewing plainly to his friends that the violation of a treaty is contempt for the gods, but that in outwitting one's enemies there is only justice, but also great glory. That's interesting. That in outwitting one's enemies there is only justice? Isn't that old Roman saying as well? Let those who want to be fooled, something like that? This is an attitude. You know, the enemy is us, remember? Let's see, where were we? But also great glory and profit mixed with pleasure. However, since he was inferior in cavalry and his sacrifices were unpropitious, he retired to Ephesus and began to get together a force of horsemen, commanding the well-to-do. What's that? The well-to-do. In case they did not wish to perform military service themselves, to furnish instead every man a horse and rider. Yeah, that's why I said last week that globally we seem to be a military force. You know? As far as wars are concerned, especially recent history, we can see that they've been pushed upon us. Right? They give a reason, it's the Muslims or whatever, and people go and fight. But this is not something of the last couple of 100 years. This has been going on for thousands of years. And I'm not quite sure if this is because people have always been manipulated into wars, or if humans are basically warlike in nature, kind of like what's that race name in science fiction? Not the Romulans, but some other race. They're very fierce, honor above everything. There were many who chose this course, and so it came to pass that Agesilaus quickly had a large force of warlike horsemen instead of worthless men-at-arms. For those who did not wish to do military service hired those who did. Yeah, money always plays a role here. It's not only the fact that there is an, I don't know if we can call it an appeal to authority, but a belief in authority would be better, right? Like Larkin Rose says, but also money. It's the existence of money makes it possible to hire an army. Let's see, where were we? For those who did not wish to do military service, hired those who did. And those who did not wish to serve as horsemen, hired those who did. Indeed, Agesilaus thought Agamemnon had done well in accepting a good mare and freeing a cowardly rich man from military service. And once, when by his orders his prisoners of war were stripped of their clothing and offered for sale by the vendors of booty, their clothing found many purchasers, but their naked bodies, which were utterly white and delicate owing to their effeminate habits, Jesus, what the heck is that, were ridiculed as useless and worthless. Then Agesilaus, noticing, said, "These are the men with whom you fight, and these the things from which you fight." When the season again favored an incursion into the enemy's country, Agesilaus gave out that he would march into Lydia, and this time he was not trying to deceive Tissaphernes, that satrap. Never saw that word before. Satrab. That satrap, however, utterly deluded himself in that he disbelieved Agesilaus because of his former trick, and thought that now at any rate the king would attack Caria, although it was ill-suited for cavalry and he was inferior in that arm of service. But Agesilaus, as he had given out that he would do, marched into the plain of Sardis, and then Tissaphernes was forced to hasten there from Caria with aid and relief, and riding through the plain with his cavalry, he cut off many straggling plunderers there. Agesilaus, accordingly, reflecting that the enemy's infantry had not yet come up, while his own forces were complete, made haste to give battle. He mingled his light-armed infantry with his horsemen, and ordered them to charge at full speed and assault the enemy, while he himself at once led up his men-at-arms. The barbarians were put to flight, and the Greeks, following close upon them, took their camp and slew many of them. As a result of this battle, the Greeks could not only harry the country of the king without fear, but had the satisfaction of seeing due punishment inflicted upon Tissaphernes, an abominable man and most hateful to Greek race. For the king at once sent Tithraustes after him, who cut off his head, and asked Agesilaus to make terms and sail back home, offering him money at the hands of envoys. But Agesilaus answered that it was for his city to make peace, and that for his own part he took more pleasure in enriching his soldiers than in getting rich himself. Moreover, the Greeks, he said, thought it honorable to take not gifts but spoils from their enemies. Nevertheless, desiring to gratify Tithraustes, because he had punished Tissaphernes, the common enemy of the Greeks, he led his army back into Phrygia, taking 30 talents from the viceroy to cover the expenses of the march. That's where the month name also comes from, March. You start marching in March. It's at the end of the winter. On the road, he received a dispatch roll from the magistrates at home, which bade him assume control of the navy as well as of the army. This was an honor which no one ever received but Agesilaus, and he was confessedly the greatest and most illustrious man of his time, as Theopompus also has somewhere said, although he prided himself more on his virtues than on his high command. But in putting Pisander in charge of the navy at this time, he was thought to have made a mistake, for there were older, more competent men to be had, and yet he gave the admiralty to him, not out of regard for the public good, but in recognition of the claims of relationship and to gratify his wife, who was the sister of Pisander. 11. As for himself, he stationed his army in the province of Pharnabazus, where he not only lived in universal plenty, but also accumulated much money. He also advanced to the confines of Paphlagonia and brought Cotys, the king of the Paphlagonians, into alliance with him. For his virtues and the confidence which he inspired inclined the king to desire his friendship. Spithridates also, from the time when he abandoned Pharnabazus and came to Agesilaus, always accompanied him in his journeys and expeditions. Spiradates had a son, a very beautiful boy named Megabates, of whom Agesilaus was ardently enamored, and a beautiful daughter also, a maiden of marriageable age. This daughter Agesilaus persuaded Cotys to marry, and then receiving from him 1,000 horsemen and 2,000 targeteers, he retired again into Phrygia, and harassed the country of Pharnabazus, who do not stand his ground nor trust in his defenses, but always kept most of his valued and precious things with him, and withdrew or fled from one part of the country to another, having no abiding place. At last, Spithridates, who had narrowly watched him in conjunction with in conjunction with Heripidas the Spartan, seized his camp and made himself master of all his treasures. Here, however, Heripidas, who had too sharp an eye to the booty that was stolen, and forced the barbarians to restore it, watching over and inquiring into everything, exasperated Spithridates so that he marched off at once to Sardis with the Paphlagonians. This is said to have annoyed Agesilaus beyond all else. He was pained at the loss of a gallant man in Spithridates, and with him of a considerable force, and was ashamed to labor under the charge of pettiness and illiberality, from which he was always ambitious to keep not only himself but also his country pure and free. Blah blah. And apart from these manifest reasons, he was irritated beyond measure by his love for the boy, which was now instilled into his heart, although when the boy was present he would summon all his resolution and strive mightily to battle against his desires. Indeed, when Megabates, it's probably Megabates anyway, when Megabates once came up and offered to embrace and kiss him, he declined his caresses. The boy was mortified at this and desisted, and afterwards kept his distance when addressing him, whereupon Agesilaus, distressed now and repented for having avoided his kiss, pretended to wonder what ailed Megabytes that he did not greet him with a kiss. "Is this thy fault?" the king's companion said. "Thou didst not accept, but did decline the fair one's kiss in fear and trembling. Yet even now he might be persuaded to come within range of thy lips." What the frack is this all about? "But see that thou dost not again play the coward." Then, after some time spent in silent reflection, Agesilaus said, "There is no harm in your persuading him, for I think I would more gladly fight that battle of the kiss over again than possess all the gold I have ever seen." Of such a mind was he while Megabates was with him, though when the boy was gone, he was so on fire with love for him that it were hard to say whether, he had the boy come back into his presence, he would have had the strength to refuse his kisses. What the frack is this all about? It's disgusting. 12. After this, Pharnabazus desired to have a conference with him, and Apollophanes of Cyzicus, who was a guest friend of both, brought the two together. Agesilaus, with his friends, came first to the appointed place, and throwing himself down in a shady place where the grass was deep, then there awaited Pharnabazus. And when Pharnabazus came, although the soft cushions and our broidered rugs had been spread for him, he was ashamed to see Agesilaus reclining as he was, and threw himself down likewise, without further ceremony on the grassy ground, although he was clad in raiment of wonderful delicacy and dyes. After mutual salutations, Pharnabazus had plenty of just complaints to make, since, although he had rendered the Lacedaemonians many great services in their war against the Athenians, his territory was now being ravaged by them. But Agesilaus, seeing the Spartans with him, bowed to the earth with shame, and at a loss for words, for they saw that Pharnabazus was a wronged man, said, "We, O Pharnabazus, during our former friendship with the king, treated what belongs to him in a friendly way, and now that we have become his enemies, we treat it in a hostile way. Accordingly, seeing that thou also desirest to be one of the king's chattels, we naturally injure him through thee. But from the day when thou shalt deem thyself worthy to be called a friend and ally of the Greek instead of a slave of the king, consider this army, these arms and ships, and all of us to be guardians of thy possessions and of thy liberty, without which nothing in the world is honorable or even worthy to be desired." Upon this, Pharnabazus declared to him his purposes. As for me, indeed, he said, if the king shall send out another general in my stead, I will be on your side, but if he entrusts me with the command, I will spare no efforts to punish and injure you in his behalf. On hearing this, Agesilaus was delighted and said, as he seized his hand and rose up with him, O Pharnabazus, I would that such a man as thou might be our friend rather than our enemy. 13. As Pharnabazus and his friends were going away, his son, who was left behind, ran up to Agesilaus and said with a smile, I make thee my guest friend Agesilaus, and offered him a javelin which he held in his hand. Agesilaus accepted it, and being delighted with the fair looks and kindly bearing of the boy, looked round upon his companions to see if any of them had anything that would do for a return gift to a fair and gallant friend. And seeing that the horse of Idaeus, his secretary, had a decorated headgear, he quickly took this off and gave it to the youth. Nor afterwards did he cease to remember him, but when, as time went on, the youth was robbed of his home by his brothers and driven into exile in Peloponnesus, he paid him much attention. He even gave him some assistance in love affairs. For the Persians were enamored of an Athenian boy, an athlete who, owing to his stature and strength, was in danger of being ruled out of the lists at Olympia. He therefore had recourse to Agesilaus with entreaties to help the boy, and Agesilaus, wishing to gratify him in this matter, also, with very great difficulty and with much trouble, effected his desires. Indeed, although in other matters he was exact and law-abiding, in matters of friendship he thought that rigid justice was a mere pretext. At any rate, there is in circulation a letter of his to Hedrius the Carian, which runs as follows. As for Nicias, if he is innocent, acquit him. If he is guilty, acquit him for my sake, but in any case acquit him. Such then was Agesilaus in most cases where the interests of his friends were concerned, but sometimes he used a critical situation rather for his own advantage. Of this he gave an instance when, as he was decamping in some haste and confusion, he left his favorite behind him sick. The sick one besought him loudly and as he was departing, but he merely turned and said that it was hard to be compassionate and at the same time prudent. This story is related by Hieronymus the philosopher. 14. Agesilaus had now been nearly 2 years in the field, and much was said about him in the interior parts of Asia, and the wonderful opinion of his self-restraint, of his simplicity of life, and of his moderation everywhere prevailed. For when he made a journey, he would take up his quarters in the most sacred precincts by himself, thus making the gods overseers and witnesses of those acts which few men are permitted to see us perform. And among so many thousands of soldiers, one could hardly find a meaner couch than that of Agesilaus, while to heat and cold he was as indifferent as if nature had given him alone the power to adapt himself to the seasons as God had tempered them. And it was most pleasing to the Greeks who dwelt in Asia to see the Persian viceroys and generals who had long been insufferably cruel and had revelled in wealth and luxury, now fearful and obsequious before a man who went about in paltry cloak, and at one brief and laconic speech from him conforming themselves to the way and to his ways, and changing their dress and mien, insomuch that many were moved to cite the words of Timotheus. Ares is Lord, of gold Greece hath no fear. 15. Asia being now unsettled and in many quarters inclining to revolt, Agesilaus set the cities there in order, and restored to their governments, without killing or banishing anyone, the proper form. The war from the Greek sea to fight for the person of the king and the wealth of Echatana and Sasu, all these names, and above all things to rob that monarch of the power to sit in leisure at his throne, playing the umpire for the Greeks in their wars, and corrupting the popular leaders. Hi Moose, how you doing? But at this point, Epicedidas the Spartan came to him with tidings that Sparta was involved in a great war with other Greeks, and that the Ephors called upon him and ordered him to come to the aid of his countrymen. O barbarous ills devised by Greeks! How else can one speak of that jealousy which now leagued and arrayed the Greeks against one another? They laid violent hands on fortune in her lofty flight, and turned their weapons which threatened the barbarians, and war, which had at last been banished from Greece, back again upon themselves. I certainly cannot agree with Demaratus the Corinthian, who said that those Greeks had missed a great pleasure who did not behold Alexander seated on the throne of Darius. Nay, I think that such might have well shed tears when they reflected that this triumph was left for Alexander and Macedonians by those who now squandered the lives of Greek generals on the fields of Leuctra, Coronia, and Corinth, and in Arabia. Agesilaus, however, never performed a nobler or greater deed than in returning home as he now did, nor was there ever a fairer example of righteous obedience to authority. That's a funny one, right? Righteous obedience to authority. My God. Righteous indignation comes to mind more. Hold on, guys, I'm rolling a ciggy. Blah, blah. Agesilaus, however, never performed a nobler or greater deed than in returning home as he now did. nor was there ever a fairer example of righteous obedience to authority. For Hannibal, though he was already in an evil plight and on the point of being driven out of Italy, could with the greatest difficulty bring himself to obey his summons to the war at home, and Alexander actually went so far as to jest when he heard of Antipater's battle with Agis, saying, "It would seem, my men, that while we were conquering Darius here, there has been a battle of mice there in Arcadia. Why then should we not call Sparta happy in the honor paid to her by Agesilaus and in his deference to her laws?" No sooner had the dispatch roll come to him than he renounced and abandoned the great fortune and power already in his grasp, and the great hopes which beckoned him on, and at once sailed off, with task all unfulfilled, leaving behind a great yearning for him among his allies, and giving the strongest confutation to the saying of Erasistratus, the son of Phaeax, who declared that the Lacedaemonians were better men in public life, but the Athenians in private. For while approving himself a most excellent king in general, he shewed himself a still better and more agreeable friend and companion to those who enjoyed his intimacy. Persian coins were stamped with the figure of an archer, and Agesilaus said, as he was breaking camp, that the king was driven him out of Asia with 10,000 archers, and for so much money had been sent to Athens and Thebes and distributed among the popular leaders there, and as a consequence those peoples made war upon the Spartans. 16. And when he had crossed the Hellespont and was marching through Thrace, he made no request of any of the barbarians, but sent envoys to each people asking whether he should traverse their country as a friend or as a foe. All the rest accordingly received him as a friend and assisted him on his way, as they were severely able. Severally? I don't know. But the people called Trallians, to whom even Xerxes gave gifts, as we are told, demanded of Agesilaus as a price for his passage 100 talents of silver and as many women. But he answered them with scorn, asking why, then, did they not come at once to get their price, and marched forward, and finding them drawn up for battle, engaged them, routed them, and slew many of them. He sent his usual inquiry forward to the king of the Macedonians also, who answered that he would deliberate upon it. Let him deliberate then, said Agesilaus, but we will march on. In amazement, therefore, at his boldness, and in fear, the Macedonian king gave orders to let him pass as a friend. Since the Thessalians were in alliance with his enemies, he ravaged their country. But to the city of Larissa he sent Xenocles and Scythes, hoping to secure its friendship. His ambassadors, however, were arrested and kept in close custody, whereupon the rest of his command were indignant, and thought that Agesilaus ought to encamp about Larissa and lay siege to it. but he declared that the capture of all Thessaly would not compensate him for the loss of either one of his men, and made terms with the enemy in order to get them back. And perhaps we need not wonder at such conduct in Agesilaus, since, when he learned that a great battle had been fought near Corinth, and that men of high repute had suddenly been taken off, and that although few Spartans altogether had been killed, the loss of their enemies was very heavy, he was not seen to be rejoiced or elated, but fetched a deep groan, and said, Alas for Hellas, which has by her own hands destroyed so many brave men. Had they lived, they could have... Hold on, I had to scroll. Where am I? Had they lived, they could have conquered in battle all the barbarians in the world. However, when the Pharsalians annoyed him and harassed his army, he ordered 500 horsemen, which he led in person to attack them, routed them, and set up a trophy at the foot of Mount Narthacium. This victory gave him special pleasure, because with the horsemen of his own mustering and training, and with no other force, he had conquered those whose chief pride was placed in their cavalry. 17. Here, Diphrides, an ephor from Sparta, met him with orders to invade Boeotia immediately. Therefore, although he was proposing to do this later with a larger armament, he thought it did not behoove him to disobey the magistrates, but said to those who were with him that the day was near for which they had come from Asia. He also sent for 2 divisions of the army at Corinth. Then the Lacedaemonians at home, wishing to do him honor, made proclamation that any young man who wished might enlist in aid of the king. All enlisted eagerly, and the magistrate chose out the most mature and vigorous of them to the number of 50, and sent them off. Agesilaus now marched through the pass of Thermopylae, traversed Phocis, and was friendly to Sparta, entered Boeotia, and encamped near Cheroneia. Here a partial eclipse of the sun occurred, and at the same time news came to him of the death of Pisander, who was defeated in the naval battle of Snidus by Pharnabazus and Conon. Agesilaus was naturally much distressed at these tidings, both because of the man thus lost, and of the city which had lost him, but nevertheless that his soldiers might not be visited with dejection and fear as they were going into battle. He ordered the messengers from the sea to reverse their tidings and say that Spartans were victorious in the naval battle. He himself also came forth publicly with a garland on his head, offered sacrifices for glad tidings, and sent portions of the sacrificial victims to his friends. What? 18. After advancing as far as Coronea and coming within sight of the enemy, he drew up his army in battle array, giving the left wing to Orchomenians, while he himself led forward the right. On the other side, the Thebans held the right wing themselves, and the Argives the left. Xenophon says this battle was unlike any ever fought, and he was present himself and fought on the side of Agesilaus, having crossed over with him from Asia. This first impact, it is true, did not meet with much resistance, nor was it long contested. But the Thebans speedily routed the Orchomenians, as Agesilaus did the Argives. Both parties, however, on hearing that their left wings were overwhelmed and in flight, turned back. Then, although the victory might have been his without peril if he had been willing to refrain from attacking the Thebans in front and to smite them in the rear after they had passed by, Agesilaus was carried away by passion and the ardor of battle and advanced directly upon them, wishing to bear them down by sheer force. Hold on, guys. So. But they received him with a vigor that matched his own, and a battle ensued which was fierce at all points in the line, but fiercest where the king himself stood surrounded by his 50 volunteers, whose opportune and emulous valor seems to have saved his life. For they fought with the utmost fury and exposed their lives in his behalf. And though they were not able to keep him from being wounded, but many blows of spears and swords pierced his armor and reached his person, they did succeed in dragging him off alive and standing in close array in front of them. They slew many foes, while many of their own number fell. But since it proved too hard a task to break the Theban front, they were forced to do what at the outset they were loath to do. L-O-T-H. Loath. They opened their ranks and let the enemy pass through, and then, when these had got clear and were already marching in looser array, the Spartans followed on the run and smote them on the flanks. They could not, however, put them to rout, but the Thebans withdrew to Mount Helicon, greatly elated over the battle, in which, as they reasoned, their own contingent had been undefeated. Uh, 19. But Agesilaus, although he was weakened by many wounds, would not retire to his tent until he had first been carried to his troops and seen that the dead were collected within the encampment. Moreover, he ordered that all of the enemy who had taken refuge in the sanctuary should be dismissed. For the temple... what the heck is that? Moreover, he ordered that all of the enemy who had taken refuge in the sanctuary should be dismissed. What's this? You're fighting a war and there's a place called sanctuary? Does that make any sense? Strange war rules, huh? About as strange as the mythological stories from India. They also had some strange rules. Like, okay, we're gonna have a war and we're gonna kill all of you, but we won't do it when the sun has set. Rules like that. Or, we're going to war, we're gonna kill all of you, but I won't club you down or shoot you with an arrow if you're on the floor unarmed. Does that sound like war? For the temple of Athena, Etonia was near at hand, and a trophy stood in front of it, which the Boeotians had long ago erected, when, under the command of Sparto, they had defeated the Athenians there and slain Tolmides, their general. Early next morning, Agesilaus, wishing to try the Thebans and see whether they would give him battle, ordered his soldiers to wreath their heads and his pipers to play their pipes, while the trophy was set up and adorned in token of their victory. And when the enemy sent to him and asked permission to take up their dead, he made a truce with them, and having thus assured to himself the victory, proceeded to Delphi, where the Pythian games were in progress. Pythian games, interesting. There he celebrated the customary procession in honor of the god, and offered up a tenth of the spoils which he had brought from Asia, amounting to 100 talents. Then he went back home, where his life and conduct brought him at once the affection and admiration of his fellow citizens. For unlike most of their generals, he came back from foreign parts unchanged and unaffected by alien customs. He showed no dislike towards home fashions, nor was he restive under them, but honored and loved what he found there just as much as those did who had never crossed the Eurotas. He made no change in his table, or his baths, or the attendance on his wife, or the decoration of his armor, or the furniture of his house. Nay, he actually let its doors remain, although they were very old. One might say they were the very doors which Aristodemus had set up. His daughters, Canathron, as Xenophon tells us, was no more elaborate than that of any other maid. Brackets open. Canuthra is the name they give to the wooden figures of Gryphius or goat stags, in which their young girls are carried at the sacred processions. Brackets close. Xenophon, it is true, had not recorded the name of the daughter of Agesilaus, and Disarchus expressed great indignation that neither her name nor that of the mother of Epaminondas was known to us, but we have found in the Lacedaemonian records that the wife of Agesilaus was named Chloria, and her daughters Eupolia and Proauga, something like that. And one can see his spear also, which is still preserved at Sparta, and which is not at all different from that of other men. Alright. I'm not sure, but I don't think we'll be repeating this again sometime in the future. Everybody in the chat, 8 Hawks, Captain, Dale. No, not Dale. Dan.
The very word secrecy is repugnant.
Dan, not or Dan. EDF, R, JJ, Joe, Jules, Matty, and Vince. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Take care. I'll see you next week.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a